can't feel your glutes when you're hip thrusting, it's okay, Cassie fucking Dennis. It's okay. I'm here to save you. And everybody else watching this video, because you are about to bear witness to my top 5 tips to helping you feel your hip thrusts better. A lot of people have this issue and it's very easily fixed. So me and Cassie fucking Dennis are gonna walk you through step by step on exactly what you can do, whether you're a beginner or advanced, to get more out of your booty when you're doing those hip thrusts. So Cassie fucking Dennis, let's get into the video. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, listen up and listen up goddamn close, because we're going to be kicking off our first tip to feeling your hip thrust much more, and it really is quite simple before we start getting into the awesome stuff, and it's making sure that you have a proper setup. You see, I could go through and explain every little bit and bob about your hip thrust setup. However, in this first tip, I'm gonna mostly stick to your foot positioning and what you should be thinking about in relation to where they are and what you're doing with your feet to make sure you're getting the most out of your glutes when you hip thrust. You see, a lot of people make the mistake of having the incorrect positioning by either, one, having their feet too far away from them, and this results in feeling way too much hamstrings. But then they might think to themselves, okay, cool, well, I'm just gonna bring my feet in a little bit closer so I can feel more glutes. But you can bring them in too close, and then that means you're gonna have too much bend at the knee and you're gonna be starting to feel your quads. So ideally, we wanna be having our feet pretty much straight up and down, so we're at about a 90-degree angle to the ground. Now, if you get in that position, that's great, but you can still screw it up by pushing through your toes instead of pushing through your heels. So a good tip for when you're first starting is to maybe even pull your toes off the ground to make sure that you can't push through them at all. When the booty-based babes first start down here, this is a pretty common mistake that they see, especially those who haven't really trained all that much in the past. However, people who are a little bit more experienced know that you need to drive through your heels to make sure you are efficiently performing your exercise. Now, even if you're in the right spot, and even if you are driving through your heels, you could still be getting one last thing wrong with your feet. And that's just being lazy with the amount that you're gonna be flaring your toes out and driving your knees out. You see, a lot of the time people have a relatively close and narrow stance, and some people feel this more, but it's pretty rare. And also, a lot of people are gonna feel their glutes a lot more with a slightly wider stance, turning their toes out, but really focusing on driving their knees out. This is gonna be activating the external rotation forces inside your hip that's gonna help you to shorten, squeeze, and feel those glutes a lot more throughout the movement. All right. Well, now you know exactly what to do with your foot positioning when you're doing a hip thrust, but what about the actual technique that you're gonna be using with what you're doing with your body and how that affects how you're gonna be feeling your glutes? You see, there are 2 primary ways in which you can hip thrust. So we have 2 options, but before we even speak about those, one mistake that a lot of people make before they even push up is they're sitting too far away from the box, and they're resting the box too high up on their back. So if this is the case, you need to scooch in and wriggle in nice and close, and ideally have the box resting so it's underneath your shoulder blades. From here, we're gonna be going through our first style of hip thrust, which is more of a hingy pattern. Now, typically speaking, this is still a really great way to hip thrust, and you'll notice that the way Cassie's doing these reps is she's really pushing her body and rocking it up and down like a board, letting her head come up and down with her body, still reaching full hip extension and extending those hips and squeezing the glutes hard at the top. And that's fantastic. She's doing a really nice hip thrust here. However, a lot of the time people don't feel this hip thrust working quite as much as the alternative option. This hingy hip thrust is great to get really strong at, and a lot of the time people like using this in higher rep ranges, but you don't get as much of a mind-muscle connection or as a feeling in your glutes as when you're actually going to be activating what we call a posterior pelvic tilt or a glute scoop. Now, down here at the booty base, people have either never thrusted when they come here, or they've been thrusting for a long time and they've been doing that hinge style pattern. Cassie was one of those people. Then I taught her how to do the glute scoop, and she immediately felt her glutes firing a hell of a lot harder. Now, typically speaking, you're going to use this particular technique when you're using those lighter loads and you're really trying to get that burn on the booty. You'll notice that in this, Cassie is no longer rocking up and down, but rather she's wriggled a little bit higher and she's making the movement come from the rib cage down. She's also not letting her head rock up and down with the movement, but rather keeping her chin tucked to her chest, which prevents her ribs from flaring and rocking up and down the box. That way, she can emphasize the movement from her abdomen down and make her hips extend and posteriorly pelvic tilt at the top of the rep, which again will lead to you feeling those glutes shortening and squeezing and contracting them much, much harder. Now, that's not the only two options, because in reality, the best option is actually probably a blend of both. You see, when you're doing lighter weights and you're really trying to get that mind-muscle connection, the glute scoop is usually what people like. As you start to go heavier and heavier, people will typically start to tend to move towards a little bit more of a hinge pattern, but they might lose that connection. So I recommend trying, when you start losing heavier weight, to hinge up and then tuck under. That's the technique that I typically tend to work towards, and you can see here in this video of me hip thrusting 300 kilos for 10 reps, soft brag, that I'm still hinging and still glute scooping to make sure that I'm getting the most out of the movement. I can really move a lot of weight, but I can still feel and connect to my glutes the best that I possibly can. All right, guys, now we've got that technique out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty and start talking about how you, especially at more advanced lifters who already know how to hip thrust, can start to activate and feel your glutes a lot more with some advanced techniques and different methods that you might not have actually tried out yet. We're gonna go through 5 of my favorite, and the first one is going to be starting off by doing 3-second ISO holds. You see, the glutes are working hardest at the top of the rep, and we're getting that maximal contraction and peak tension at the top when we're fully locked out and squeezing. So, if we want to feel those glutes more, then it makes a lot of sense to squeeze, contract, and hold that contraction for an extended period of time. Now, you don't have to do 3 seconds, you could do 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be, but generally 3-second ISO holds at the top of every rep is a fantastic way to start to get a better mind-muscle connection. I get a lot of the booty-based babes down here starting with that when they first start hip thrusting, because it gets that better neural drive. Now, if you didn't want to be doing those 3-second holds, you could use option 2, which makes your hip thrust considerably harder, and again, by spending more time in end range hip extension by doing our 1 1/4 hip thrust. This is where we come all the way up, squeeze, go back down 1/4, and come all the way up and squeeze again, so we're getting that additional quarter of the rep and that additional time under tension when we are at the peak tension for the glutes, contracting and squeezing hard at the top. Now, after that, we can maybe not worry so much about squeezing longer at the top, but maybe alter our body position a little bit more by coming into an American hip thrust. Now, I don't really prescribe these all that much, but really all we're doing with an American hip thrust is, instead of setting up ourselves so our shoulder blades are sitting, or the box is sitting underneath our shoulder blades, we wriggle up just a little bit higher, so about our mid-back is on the bench. This forces us to focus into more of a posterior pelvic tilt, which we mentioned earlier is going to help you to feel those glutes a little bit more. Some people will feel a little bit more with this, some people might not feel it all that much, so experiment with this one, and it's going to be up to you to see whether you like this version or not, but you will probably not be able to get anywhere near as much range of motion, but that's okay, because again, you're going to be feeling your glutes more by spending more range in end range hip extension with that additional posterior pelvic tilt. Now, we're going to be having some fun and bringing our bands out. You see, the glutes extend the hips, they also work to posterior pelvic tilt and glute scoop, as we mentioned, but let's not forget, they are external rotators and they abduct our legs outwards. That means that when we put a band around our knees, not only are we working up and down against resistance, but now our glutes are working out by having to drive against that band, so we get double duty for the booty. Now, my personal favorite protocol for doing this is knee-banded constant tension reps. This gets you an incredible pump because you've got that double duty for the booty and the glutes don't get a rest. So band on, knees out, relatively fast reps, still squeezing at the top, but we want to be going up and down, not pausing the barbell onto the ground. 3 sets of 20 constant tension hip thrusts. I tell you what, if your glutes aren't burning after that, then maybe you got something wrong with it. Now, lastly, we have my all-time favorite variation, which is a combination of 2 of these put together, which is a knee-banded 1 1/4 hip thrust. Now, you're definitely going to need to lighten the load with this because we're making it obviously harder with the band and the additional quarter at the top. And a lot of the time, if people can't feel their glutes, or they're just not really feeling it that day, then I get them to do this as a warm-up set or a pre-activation set because it really lights the glutes on fire. typically speaking, I'll get people to use lighter loads or even body weight and do this for anywhere between about 12 to 15 reps. And after they've done that, they're gonna be lighting the glutes on fire, getting that mind-muscle connection, putting the brain in the booty, and be ready to attack their heavier sets. Now, lastly, you could just also need to accept that maybe you need to be doing some more warm-up sets as well. If you're just jumping straight into your heavy sets when you're doing hip thrusts, well, maybe you haven't really given your glutes a chance to kind of warm up, activate, and prime them with those nice, tasty conscious contractions at that lighter weight before you start to move heavier weight, and are probably compromising technique because of that lack of that neural drive and getting your central nervous system ready and prepared to move big weight. So again, use all of these techniques and also make sure that you're doing effective warm-up sets before your heavy work to make sure you are feeling those glutes on fire. All right. Well, now you know how to get your feet set up, you know how to actually go through the movement, and you have a few advanced techniques to use when you're doing your sets. But what about before you even start doing your sets? You see, it's not absolutely necessary, but it's definitely not ill-advised to be doing a little bit of glute activation before you come through and actually begin your workouts, whether you're doing hip thrusts or any other workout for that matter, if you want to help to establish a little bit of a better mind-muscle connection. You see, a lot of the time I hear people saying that they have like glute amnesia or that their glutes are broken or like whatever it is, and to be honest with you, it's not really the case. Even if you can't feel your glutes when you're hip thrusting, they're still working, and I can tell you that for sure and certain, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to stand up or you wouldn't be able to push your hips up and down. But it's nice to feel them, it's nice to get that burn. So, doing some pre-activation before we come in by using some light bands to stimulate and not annihilate the glutes is a fantastic way to be able to start to develop that mind-muscle connection and start to actually warm up before we come into our heavier work. So, I could go through and show you about 50 different exercises that you could use to activate your glutes, but instead, I'm just gonna show you 5 simple ones that you can do right now before you're gonna be starting getting into your hip thrust. The first is just gonna be a knee banded bodyweight hip thrust. And it's as simple as just going through, really focusing on the squeeze, consciously contracting, being aware of your positioning, driving those knees out until you start to get a tasty burn. After that, you can jump up and you can start to do some lateral banded walks, going from side to side, making sure we're now firing up a little bit more through our hip abductors and really feeling those upper outer glutes that start to burn. After that, you can come through and do some standing kickbacks, which is one that a lot of the girls really love, to isolate and squeeze the glutes in that single leg fashion. So for those of you who might feel one glute activating a little bit more than the other, then well, this could be a great option for you. And again, moving on to another kickback variation, which is a quadruped banded kickback, or also known as a donkey kickback, where we're gonna be anchoring a light band around the knee, extending the leg all the way up, and really squeezing that glute. And a lot of people really love this one, and it feels fantastic. Make sure that you really get that nice squeeze at the top every time. And again, if you do have a glute imbalance and you feel one side more than the other, a fantastic option for you here. Now, lastly, we also have our banded clamshells, which it works the glutes a little bit differently here, and they're coming into external rotation. So this is going to be allowing you to strengthen as we move our leg up and out to the side by rotating outwards against that banded resistance. Now, these last couple of exercises you can also do without a band as well, and you can just do them body weight. So if you don't have access to bands, then a lot of the time, body weight with this is hard enough as well. So spend about no more than 5 minutes priming your glutes, getting that mind muscle connection, putting the brain in the booty, and hopefully you'll feel them working even harder on your working sets if you're doing everything right in those first 3 steps as well. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to just focus on probably the most important tip of all, and that is to be fucking patient. You see, sometimes it takes a little while for you to get used to something. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a while to establish a good mind-muscle connection, especially if you are a beginner, or especially if you don't train frequently enough or consistently enough to actually start to build that body awareness where your brain can actually put itself into the booty and say, yeah, bitch, I'm about to isolate fire and work the fucking house down, because it's used to doing its job where it needs to. You see, a lot of the time when the people first join the booty base, they'll either join and they might feel things right away, and that's fantastic. A lot of the time, those are people who are, one, have either trained before, or two, come from some kind of sports background where they've actually moved their body in space and time, and they're used to rotating, twisting, jumping, stopping, starting, because they have that athletic background to support that actual movement. But for those of you who are pretty sedentary, you haven't really played much sport in your lifetime, or you have a desk job and you're sitting on your ass all day, maybe it might take a little bit longer just to wake those glutes up and get you to start feeling it. But I promise you, if you utilize all the tips in this video, you will definitely get there. And lastly, if you don't feel your glutes working like crazy on a hip thrust, as mentioned, that doesn't mean they're not working. And one more tip, okay, is let's not forget, you're gonna feel your hip thrust a lot more in your higher rep ranges with lighter weight. Anything for around about probably 10 to 20 to 30 rep ranges, especially if you're doing knee banded 1 1/4 and all this crazy shit, I can guarantee you do that kind of stuff, you're gonna get a burn in your glutes. But if you're starting to work really heavy, you're starting to focus on progressive overload, you're starting to focus on strengthening the movement and less on actually feeling and squeezing the muscle, then you're probably going to feel your glutes a lot less. When I hip thrust heavy for 10 reps or less, I'm not thinking about feeling that deep contraction in my glutes. I'm thinking about huffing and puffing and pushing my hips up to the motherfucking sky and doing everything I can to reach lockout. Because the weight's so heavy, it's just really hard for me to focus on that feeling. So if you're not feeling your glutes on your heavy hip thrust, that's okay. Don't focus on that. Focus on getting strong, focus on perfecting the movement, focus on lifting with good technique, and that's gonna get you progressively stronger, which is actually gonna grow your glutes a considerable amount more. And also do exactly that same thing in higher rep ranges as well. Just because you're doing a higher rep range with lighter weight doesn't mean you can't still get stronger at that rep range in a higher weight and actually feel your glutes and get stronger, so you're focusing on both the movement and the muscle simultaneously. And in my opinion, that right there is the #1 key to building and growing your glutes. Burning in high rep ranges and also focusing on setting high rep range PBs. And let me tell you a little something, high rep PBs is going to be building your booties. Well, there you have it, ladies. That is the top 5 ways in which you can start to feel your glutes a lot more. Really, there was way fucking more than 5 tips there, but hey, I like to over-deliver. And if you're questioning, no, I don't know if I believe this, Glute Guru, how do I know if this really works? Well, why don't I just ask Cassie fucking Dennis? Cassie, tell me, you weren't feeling those hip thrusts before. How you feeling after doing all those exercise demos?
Pretty bloody good.
Pretty bloody fucking good. Absolutely beautiful. Well, ladies, make sure you stick around on this YouTube channel, because we are going to be delivering you far, far, far more amazing content just like this, because in 2021, we're taking over the motherfucking toolbox CFD. Ah, hell fucking yeehaw. So, make sure that before you go, you do me a favor. You come on in there nice and close, Jeremiah. Come in nice and close. Listen to me, everybody watching at home. I need you to do a little something. I need you to go and like, comment, subscribe, turn on the motherfucking bell. And ladies, cats for hips, you know what they say. YouTube, skip it about the YouTube.